Your driver is just a driver, right? That's what Victoria Pemberton believed until the day she heard mysterious piano music floating through her Manon. Who could be playing such beautiful melodies? The wealthy socialite searched everywhere but found no source for the hauntingly gorgeous sound. Little did she know, her black driver Marcus was hiding a secret that would shatter everything she thought she knew about talent, worth, and the people we dismiss without a second thought. When Victoria finally discovered the truth, she froze in complete shock. What she learned changed not just her perspective, but her entire life. This incredible true story will leave you speechless and questioning your own assumptions about the extraordinary people we encounter every day. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now. Subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published news stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The black Lincoln Navigator pulled into the circular driveway of the Pemberton estate, its engine purring to a stop beneath the grand marble columns. Marcus Thompson stepped out, adjusting his crisp black uniform and taking in the imposing mansion before him. At 28, he'd driven for wealthy clients before, but nothing quite like this. The front door opened with theatrical precision, and Victoria Pemberton emerged like royalty addressing peasants. Her silver hair was pulled into a severe chignon, her Chanel suit pristine despite the morning hour. She looked Marcus up and down with the kind of inspection reserved for buying livestock. "You must be the new driver," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been told no. "James said you came highly recommended, though I have my doubts about these agencies lately." Marcus maintained his professional composure. "Yes, ma'am, Marcus Thompson. I'm here to—" "I don't need your life story," Victoria cut him off sharply. "James will give you your instructions. I expect punctuality, silence unless spoken to, and absolute discretion. I don't tolerate familiarity from the help." James Chen, Victoria's personal assistant, appeared behind her with an apologetic expression. "Mrs. Pemberton, Mr. Thompson has excellent references, 5 years of spotless service with—" "I don't care if he drove for the president," Victoria snapped. "He works for me now, and he'll follow my rules. Is that understood?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Perfectly clear, ma'am." Victoria's cold blue eyes lingered on him for another moment. "Good. Your primary responsibility is driving me to my various appointments. You'll also chauffeur my daughter Eleanor when needed. The garage apartment above the 3-car garage will be your quarters. James will show you around." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Thompson. I've had issues with previous drivers thinking they could become friendly with the family. You're an employee, nothing more. Remember your place and we'll get along just fine." As Victoria's heels clicked away on the marble foyer, James shook his head apologetically. "Don't take it personally. She's particular about boundaries." Marcus managed a wry smile. "No offense taken. I've dealt with worse." But as he followed James toward the garage, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria Pemberton saw him as something less than human. Her dismissive tone, the way she spoke about him like he wasn't standing right there, it was all too familiar. He'd hoped those days were behind him. 3 weeks into the job, Marcus had settled into a routine of professional invisibility. Every morning at 7 sharp, he'd pull the Navigator around to the front entrance, wait precisely 2 minutes, then open the door for Victoria Pemberton's grand entrance into her day of social obligation. "The Meridian Club first," Victoria would announce, never acknowledging his greeting, then the gallery lunch at Les Bernardines, and the conservatory board meeting at 3. Marcus had memorized her schedule, her preferences, even her moods. When she was particularly agitated, she'd make cutting remarks about the declining quality of service these days, or how some people simply don't understand excellence. Day was one of those days. "I don't know why James insists on hiring from these agencies," Victoria complained to her friend Margaret Sterling during their ride to lunch. "The previous drivers at least knew their place. This one has an education, apparently. Makes him think he's better than he is." Margaret glanced at Marcus through the rearview mirror. "Education can be dangerous in the help, Victoria. Gives them ideas above their station." Exactly my point, Victoria continued, raising her voice as if Marcus couldn't hear her. I caught him reading a book while waiting yesterday, the New York Times no less, as if he could possibly understand the cultural section. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter but maintained his neutral expression. He'd been reading a review of the Metropolitan Opera's latest production, a performance he'd attended years ago when such luxuries were still possible. Later that afternoon, Eleanor Pemberton emerged from the mansion for her ride to the conservatory. Unlike her mother, she offered a small smile when Marcus opened her door. "Thank you," she said quietly, sliding into the back seat. During the drive, Marcus caught her reflection in a mirror. Where Victoria radiated confidence and disdain, Eleanor seemed to carry the weight of constant disappointment. Her violin case sat beside her like a burden rather than a passion. "Rough day?" Marcus asked gently, breaking his usual silence. Eleanor looked up, surprised. "Mother says I shouldn't discuss personal matters with the staff." "Of course. My apologies, Miss Pemberton." But Eleanor's expression softened. "It's just the conservatory is so competitive, sometimes I wonder if I'm even good enough to be there." Marcus wanted to offer encouragement, to tell her that talent often bloomed in unexpected ways, but Victoria's warnings echoed in his mind. Instead, he simply nodded in the mirror. "I'm sure you'll find your way," he said diplomatically. That evening, as Marcus cleaned the navigator, he overheard Victoria on the phone through the open library window. "The driver situation is becoming intolerable, James. He's too aware. I need someone who understands their role better. These educated ones always cause problems, eventually." Marcus paused in his work, recognizing the familiar sting of being reduced to his job title, his worth measured solely by his willingness to remain invisible. The Pemberton mansion held secrets in every corner, and Marcus had discovered most of them during his waiting hours. Hidden behind the main staircase, down a corridor lined with family portraits, lay a room that seemed frozen in time. It was Eleanor's older brother's music room, James had mentioned once, a son who died in a car accident 5 years ago. The space remained untouched, a shrine to interrupted dreams. Marcus found himself drawn there during his breaks, when Victoria was occupied with her social calls and Eleanor was at the conservatory. The room's centerpiece was a magnificent Steinway grand piano, its ebony surface reflecting the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. He'd been admiring the instrument for weeks, never daring to lift the lid, when Eleanor's voice startled him from the doorway. "You play?" Marcus spun around, his heart racing. "Miss Pemberton, I was just—" "It's okay," Eleanor said, stepping into the room with a sad smile. "I come here sometimes too. Michael used to practice for hours. Mother can't bear to come in any more." She approached the piano, running her fingers along its edge. "He was brilliant, really brilliant, not like me." Marcus watched her carefully. "What makes you say that?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Have you heard me practice? I'm adequate at best. The conservatory professors are polite, but I can see it in their eyes. I'm there because of my family's donations, not my talent." "Talent isn't always obvious at first glance," Marcus offered gently. "You really think so?" Eleanor looked at him with desperate hope. "Sometimes I feel like such a fraud. Mother has such high expectations, and I'm constantly disappointing her." Marcus felt a familiar pang, the weight of others' expectations, the fear of not being enough. "What do you love about music?" The question seemed to surprise Eleanor. Nobody's ever asked me that before. They always ask what I want to achieve or how I plan to honor the family legacy." She was quiet for a moment. "I love how it makes me feel like I'm not alone. When I play, even badly, it's like the music understands something about me that I can't put into words." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. "That's not nothing, Miss Pemberton." Eleanor studied his face. "You do play, don't you? I can tell." Before Marcus could answer, the sound of Victoria's heels echoed in the hallway. Eleanor quickly moved away from the piano, and Marcus stepped back toward the door. "Eleanor, where are you?" Victoria's voice carried irritation. "Your tutor is here." "Coming, Mother," Eleanor called back, then whispered to Marcus, "Please don't tell her I was in here. She gets upset." As Eleanor hurried out, Marcus remained in the music room for another moment, looking at the piano. His fingers ached to touch the keys, to feel that familiar connection between heart and sound. But Victoria's warnings about knowing his place echoed in his mind. He was just the driver, nothing more. Yet as he left the room, he couldn't shake Eleanor's words about music understanding something that couldn't be put into words. He knew exactly what she meant. He'd felt it himself countless times, in a life that seemed increasingly distant from where he stood now. The house fell into its afternoon silence as Victoria departed for her bridge club and Eleanor left for her violin lesson. Marcus had 2 hours before his next pickup, time that usually dragged by in the garage apartment, reading or staring at the ceiling. Today the pull of the music room was irresistible. Marcus found himself standing before the Steinway again, but this time he lifted the lid. The keys gleamed like perfect teeth, each one calling to him with memories of a different life. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. Just once, he whispered to himself. The first chord filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Marcus closed his eyes and let muscle memory take over. His hands found Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece he'd performed at Carnegie Hall 6 years ago, when the world still held infinite possibilities. The music flowed through him, washing away weeks of "Yes, ma'am" and "Right away, Mrs. Pemberton." For these precious minutes, he wasn't Marcus the driver. He was Marcus the pianist, the composer, the man who'd once made audiences weep with his interpretations. He transitioned into an original composition, something he'd written during his Juilliard days but never had the courage to perform publicly. The melody spoke of dreams deferred, of talent hidden behind necessity, of the quiet dignity required to survive in a world that saw only what it wanted to see. The music swelled, filling every corner of the room, spilling into the hallway like water finding its way downstream. Marcus was lost in the sound, in the feeling of being himself again, when the front door slammed shut. His hands froze on the keys. Victoria's voice echoed through the mansion. James, where are you?" Marcus quickly closed the piano lid and slipped out of the music room, his heart hammering. He made it to the kitchen just as Victoria's heels clicked across the marble foyer. "The strangest thing," Victoria was saying to James, who appeared from his office. "I could have sworn I heard piano music when I pulled into the driveway. Beautiful music, better than anyone Eleanor's ever produced." James looked puzzled. "Piano music? But Eleanor's at her lesson and we don't have anyone else in the house who plays." "Exactly my point," Victoria said, her voice sharp with confusion. "I searched the main floor, but I can't find the source. Perhaps it was coming from the neighbors?" "The Hendersons are in Europe, and the Pratts don't have a piano," James replied. Victoria's frown deepened. Well, it had to come from somewhere. Music that gorgeous doesn't just materialize from thin air. From the kitchen doorway, Marcus watched Victoria pace the foyer, clearly unsettled by the mystery. He pressed himself against the wall, afraid his racing heartbeat might give him away. "I want you to check all the radios and stereo systems," Victoria instructed James. "Perhaps one was left on somewhere." "Of course, Mrs. Pemberton." As Victoria disappeared up the staircase, Marcus slipped out the back door and circled around to the garage. His hands were still shaking from the close call, but underneath the fear was something else, a feeling he'd almost forgotten. Joy. Pure, undiluted joy from making music again. But as he climbed the stairs to his apartment, reality crashed back down. He was playing with fire, risking the job he desperately needed. Victoria would never understand or forgive such a breach of boundary. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Marcus waited in the Navigator outside Victoria's dermatologist office. Through the windshield he watched Victoria's face transform from casual irritation to genuine panic as she spoke into her phone. "What do you mean, academic probation?" Victoria's voice carried clearly through the car's open windows. "We've donated millions to that conservatory." Marcus pretended to read his book while listening to the one-sided conversation. "Professor Harrison, surely we can discuss this privately. Yes, I understand her performance has been concerning. But expulsion? That's completely unacceptable." Victoria ended the call and sat in stunned silence for several minutes before composing herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice-cold professional. "Poem. Immediately." The drive passed in tense silence. Victoria stared out the window, her jaw clenched tight. Marcus had seen this expression before. It was the look of someone whose carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. At the mansion, Victoria barely waited for the car to stop before storming inside. "Mother, I can explain." Eleanor's voice was small, defeated. "Explain? Explain how you've embarrassed our family name, how you've made me look like a fool in front of the conservatory board." "I've been trying, but the other students are so much better, and I can't seem to—" "Trying isn't good enough." Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. "Do you have any idea what Margaret Sterling will say when she finds out? The social ramifications of this disaster." Eleanor's quiet sobs drifted into the foyer. "I'm sorry, Mother. I know I've disappointed you." "Disappointed doesn't begin to cover it," Victoria snapped. "So you can humiliate me with your mediocrity." Marcus felt his chest tighten with familiar anger. He'd heard these kinds of crushing words before, knew the damage they could inflict on someone's spirit. "Perhaps," Eleanor whispered, "I should just quit music altogether." "Absolutely not." Victoria's response was swift and sharp. "Quitting will make the scandal worse. You will figure out how to salvage this situation, or I will find someone who can help you do it." The conversation ended with Eleanor's footsteps rushing up the staircase and her bedroom door slamming shut. Victoria emerged from the living room looking haggard, her perfect composure finally cracked. "James," she called, "cancel my afternoon appointments. I need to think." As Victoria retreated to her study, Marcus felt a crushing weight settle on his chest. He thought of Eleanor's earlier words about music making her feel less alone, about her genuine love for something her mother saw only as a social tool. He knew that feeling, the pressure to perform, to be worthy of opportunities others took for granted, to carry the weight of expectations that had nothing to do with personal passion. That evening he heard Eleanor crying through her bedroom window as he cleaned the car below. The next morning brought no relief to the Pemberton household. Marcus arrived to find Victoria on the phone with what sounded like the fifth person in a series of increasingly desperate calls. "Dr. Morrison, surely there must be something extra tutoring, private coaching. Money is no object." Victoria's voice carried a tremor Marcus had never heard before. He busied himself organizing the trunk while the conversation continued through the library's open French doors. "I see, yes, I understand talent can't be bought, but surely technique can be improved." The call ended with Victoria's sharp intake of breath. Marcus glanced up to see her slumped in her leather chair, looking older than her 52 years. "James," she called wearily, "get me Margaret Sterling on the line." This conversation proved even more devastating. Marcus could only hear Victoria's side, but her friend's smugness seemed to seep through the phone. "Yes, Margaret, I'm sure you've heard—" "No, Eleanor won't be performing at the Spring Gala. I understand you're—" "Amanda is the featured soloist now." A long pause, during which Victoria's face grew progressively paler. "Of course, you didn't mean to gloat. Yes, I'm sure Amanda's success is purely based on merit. No, we won't be attending the board dinner." When the call ended, Victoria sat in silence for several minutes. Then, to Marcus's surprise, she began to cry. Quiet, frustrated tears that spoke of a lifetime of measuring worth through social standing. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her own eyes red from crying. "Mother?" "Go away, Eleanor. I can't look at you right now." But I wanted to tell you, Eleanor's face crumpled. I never wanted to disappoint you. I'm not good enough. I've never been good enough. Victoria looked up sharply. Don't you dare make this about your feelings. This is about our family's reputation, our standing in the community. Do you think your father built this empire so his daughter could be mediocre? I know I'm a failure, Eleanor whispered. I see it in everyone's eyes at the conservatory. The professors, the other students, they all know I don't belong there. Then why didn't you work harder? Why didn't you practice more? I did practice, hours every day, but it's not enough. It's never enough. Eleanor's voice broke completely. Sometimes I think Michael got all the musical talent, and I'm just left over. The mention of her deceased son hit Victoria like a physical blow. She stood abruptly, turning away from Eleanor. Don't you dare bring your brother into this. But it's true, isn't it? He was the real musician. I'm just pretending to be something I'm not. Victoria whirled around, her face a mask of pain and fury. Your brother is dead, Eleanor, dead. And you're alive, which means you have responsibilities. You have a name to uphold, a legacy to continue. Your personal feelings are irrelevant. Eleanor fled the room, leaving Victoria alone with her grief and rage. Marcus, who had witnessed the entire exchange from the doorway, felt his heart breaking for both women, one crushed by impossible expectations, the other drowning in her own unprocessed loss. That evening, as Marcus sat in his apartment, he could hear Eleanor playing her violin through the thin walls. The melody was haunting and sad, filled with all the emotion she couldn't express in words. It wasn't technically perfect, but it was honest, more honest than anything he'd heard from the mansion's privileged walls. He found himself humming along, his fingers moving silently over an invisible keyboard, adding harmonies that existed only in his mind. 2 weeks before the conservatory's annual fundraising gala, Victoria's desperation reached new heights. Marcus watched her transform from devastated mother to master manipulator, crafting elaborate lies to preserve her social standing. Of course Eleanor will be performing, Victoria told Mrs. Hamilton during their lunch at the country club. She's been working on a particularly challenging piece, very avant-garde. You wouldn't understand it. Marcus caught her eye in the rearview mirror as they drove home. For a moment her mask slipped, revealing the panic underneath. The Meridian Club next, she instructed, her voice brittle. I need to speak with the board about the seating arrangements. At the club, Victoria's performance continued. Eleanor's so focused on her music right now, she's barely speaking to anyone. You know how artists can be when they're in their creative zone. Margaret Sterling raised an eyebrow. How fascinating. I heard she was having some difficulties at the conservatory. Victoria's smile never wavered. Difficulties, hardly. Professor Harrison was just commenting on her unique interpretation style. Some people mistake artistic vision for conventional problems. Marcus cringed at the obvious lies, but Margaret seemed to buy them, or at least pretended to. That afternoon, Victoria cornered James in his office. I need you to find Eleanor a performance coach, someone discreet, someone who can work miracles in 2 weeks. Mrs. Pemberton, with respect, 2 weeks isn't enough time to make it work, James, whatever it costs. The coach Victoria hired was a stern Russian woman named Madame Volkov, who arrived the next day with the demeanor of a drill sergeant. Within hours, the sound of Eleanor's increasingly frantic violin practice filled the mansion. Again, Madame Volkov's voice carried through the walls. Your bow control is atrocious. How do you expect to perform at Lincoln Center with such technique? Marcus found Eleanor crying in the garden later that evening. She says I have no natural ability, Eleanor sobbed. That I'm wasting everyone's time. She's wrong, Marcus said gently, unable to stop himself. Eleanor looked up, surprised. How would you know? Marcus hesitated, then sat on the garden bench beside her. Music isn't just about technical perfection, it's about connection. I heard you playing the other night. It was beautiful, but not good enough for the gala, not good enough for Mother's friends to respect. Sometimes the most important audience is yourself. Eleanor studied his face in the moonlight. What are you doing out there? You should be practicing your... As Eleanor hurried inside, Marcus remained in the garden, feeling the weight of secrets he couldn't share. 3 days later, Victoria made her final preparations for the gala. Her dress was a masterpiece of understated elegance, her jewelry carefully chosen to convey wealth without vulgarity. "This evening will determine everything," she told James, as Marcus loaded her purse into the car. "Either Eleanor redeems herself or—" But Marcus understood. Victoria had built her entire identity on her family's cultural significance. Without it, she was just another wealthy woman with nothing meaningful to contribute. During the drive to the venue, Victoria sat rigid in the back seat, checking her phone constantly for updates from Madame Volkov. "She says Eleanor is as ready as she'll ever be," Victoria murmured, though her tone suggested this wasn't particularly encouraging. "I'm sure she'll do wonderfully," Marcus offered. Victoria's laugh was bitter. Wonderful would be a miracle at this point. I'll settle for not embarrassing. The evening of the gala arrived with Eleanor locked in her room, refusing to come out. Marcus could hear Victoria pounding on the door from the foyer below. "Eleanor Pemberton, you open this door this instant. The car leaves in 20 minutes. "I can't do it, Mother." Eleanor's voice was muffled but desperate. "I'm going to humiliate us if you don't perform. Now get dressed." Marcus climbed the stairs, drawn by the desperation in both voices. Victoria stood outside Eleanor's door in her evening gown, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. "She won't come out," Victoria said when she saw him. "She's having some sort of breakdown." From behind the door came the sound of Eleanor's violin, not the practiced pieces from her lessons, but something raw and improvised, full of anguish. "Maybe," Marcus suggested carefully, "she needs a different kind of encouragement." Victoria whirled on him. "And what would you know about it? You think driving rich people around makes you an expert on performance anxiety?" The words stung, but Marcus pressed on. "Sometimes when people are afraid, they need to remember why they started loving something in the first place." "Love?" Victoria's voice was incredulous. "This isn't about love. This is about duty, about family honor, about once you're on stage, I'll freeze up like I always do. I'll play badly like I always do, and you'll spend the rest of the evening making excuses for your pathetic daughter." Eleanor turned and ran down the hallway toward the music room. Victoria followed, with Marcus close behind. In Michael's old sanctuary, Eleanor collapsed onto the piano bench, sobbing. "I just want to feel like music loves me back, just once." "Is that too much to ask?" Victoria stood frozen in the doorway of her son's room, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking completely. "Eleanor, please." But Eleanor was beyond hearing. She sat at the piano and began to play not her violin pieces, but something on the keys, halting and amateur but filled with heartbreak. Marcus couldn't stand it any more. Something in Eleanor's playing called to every musician's soul he'd ever met. The desperate need to be heard, to be understood, to matter. He moved to the piano bench. "May I?" Eleanor looked up through her tears, nodding. Marcus placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The melody that emerged was like sunlight after a storm, complex but accessible, technically brilliant but emotionally honest. It was a piece he'd composed years ago, inspired by the feeling of finding beauty in unexpected places. The music filled the room, spilled into the hallway, seemed to touch every corner of the mansion with its grace. Marcus felt everything else fall away. Victoria's prejudices, his own fears, the rigid boundaries that had defined their relationship. He was just a musician, sharing music with someone who needed to hear it. Eleanor stopped crying, her breathing gradually slowing as the melody worked its magic. Even Victoria stood transfixed, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with something that looked like wonder. When the piece ended, the silence was profound. Victoria's voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. How did you—" The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Victoria stared at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time, her carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she demanded, her voice sharp with confusion and something that might have been fear. Marcus lifted his hands from the keys, reality crashing back down around him. "Mrs. Pemberton, I should explain how my driver just played the most beautiful music I've ever heard in my own home." Eleanor wiped her eyes, looking between them. "Marcus, that was incredible. I've never heard anything so—" "So what?" Victoria snapped. "So humiliating. Do you realize what this means? My daughter can barely manage a simple piece, and the help is playing like—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus stood slowly, his heart hammering. There was no hiding now, no maintaining the careful boundaries Victoria had established. Like what, Mrs. Pemberton? Victoria's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Like someone who actually belongs at a conservatory. Like someone with real talent. Like someone who makes you question everything you believe about worth and ability. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Eleanor found her voice first. "Marcus, how long have you been able to play like that?" Marcus looked at her kind, tear-stained face and made a decision that would change everything. "Since I was 7 years old. I graduated from Juilliard 6 years ago with highest honor. I've performed at Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, the Kennedy Center." Victoria's face went white. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Marcus turned to face her fully. "Is it impossible or just inconvenient for your worldview? But you're a driver. You're—" "Black," Marcus supplied when she couldn't find words. "Poor, working class, none of those things prevent someone from having talent, Mrs. Pemberton." Eleanor stood up shakily. "You went to Juilliard, but how did you end up—" Marcus sighed, feeling the weight of his story. "My father had a stroke my senior year. Medical bills, family obligations. Someone had to work. The music world doesn't wait for personal crises." Victoria sank into a nearby chair, her composure completely shattered. "But the agencies, your references, are all legitimate. I've been driving for 3 years since the classical music career became unsustainable. I needed steady income, reliable health insurance. You gave up performing to take care of my family. There's a difference." Victoria was staring at her hands, her voice barely audible. I've said things, assumed things." "Yes, you have," Marcus confirmed quietly. "You've treated me like I was somehow less than human because of my job, my race, your own prejudices about what talented people look like." Eleanor moved closer to the piano. "Play something else, please." Marcus looked at Victoria, who still sat in stunned silence. "I don't think your mother—" "I don't care what Mother thinks right now," Eleanor said with more strength than Marcus had ever heard from her. "I need to hear more. I need to understand what real music sounds like." Marcus sat back down and began to play another original composition, this one inspired by resilience, the ability to find beauty even when the world tries to convince you that you don't deserve it. As the music filled the room, Victoria slowly raised her head, tears streaming down her face. The music room fell silent except for Victoria's quiet weeping. Eleanor sat transfixed, her earlier panic replaced by wonder, while Marcus remained at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys. "Tell me everything," Eleanor whispered. "Please." Marcus looked at Victoria, who was staring at the floor, her entire world crumbling around her. "Are you sure you want to hear this, Mrs. Pemberton?" Victoria's voice was hoarse. I think I need to—" Marcus began slowly, his words careful but honest. "I grew up in Detroit. My mother worked 3 jobs to pay for my piano lessons. By age 15, I was winning national competitions. Juilliard offered me a full scholarship." "What was your focus?" Eleanor asked, moving closer. "Classical performance and composition. I studied under Dr. Patricia Chen. You might know her work." Victoria's head snapped up. "Patricia Chen? The Patricia Chen who performed with the New York Philharmonic?" "The same. She said I had the potential to be one of the great classical pianists of my generation." Marcus's voice carried old pain. "My senior recital was scheduled for Carnegie Hall. 3 record labels were interested. Everything was falling into place." "What happened?" Eleanor asked gently. "My father's stroke happened 3 days before my recital. Massive medical bills, rehabilitation costs. My mother couldn't work because she was caring for him. I had to choose between my career and my family." Victoria was staring at him now, her face a mixture of horror and recognition. "You chose family." "I chose family, deferred the recital, took a job to pay bills. The music world moves fast. By the time I could have returned, the momentum was gone. The labels moved on to newer prospects." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "But you could still perform now, couldn't you? It's not too late." Marcus smiled sadly. "Classical music is a young person's game, Miss Pemberton. Plus, I've been out of practice for too long. My technique isn't what it was." "That's not true," Eleanor said fiercely. "What you just played, that was extraordinary." "It was adequate," Marcus corrected gently. "But thank you." Victoria stood abruptly and walked to the window, her shoulders shaking. When she turned back, her face was streaked with tears and something that looked like shame. "I've been so wrong," she whispered. "So incredibly, unforgivably wrong. Mrs. Pemberton, no." She held up a hand. "Let me say this. I've spent 3 months treating you like you were beneath me, making assumptions about your intelligence, your worth, your capabilities. I've been exactly the kind of person I claim to despise." Marcus said nothing, letting her work through her realization. "And meanwhile," Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger, "you've been nothing but professional, patient with my rudeness, kind to my daughter, gracious in the face of treatment that was... I owe you an apology that can never be adequate. But more than that, I owe you respect that should have been automatic from day one." Marcus nodded slowly. "Apology accepted, Mrs. Pemberton." "Victoria," she corrected. "Please, I think we're past formalities, don't you?" The moment was interrupted by Eleanor's gasp of recognition. "Wait. Marcus Thompson. M. Thompson. You composed Variations on Hope, didn't you? I have that sheet music. I've been trying to learn it for months." Marcus looked surprised. "You know that piece?" "No, there is my favorite contemporary classical work. I had no idea." Eleanor turned to her mother. "Mother, do you realize what this means? Marcus is more qualified than half the conservatory faculty." Victoria closed her eyes, the full impact of her prejudice hitting her like a physical blow. When she opened them, her gaze was steady and determined. "Then perhaps," she said quietly, "it's time we made some things right." "Absolutely not," Marcus said firmly. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, Victoria, but I can't perform at the gala. I haven't prepared, I'm not properly dressed, and frankly, it would be professionally inappropriate." Victoria stood in her evening gown, car keys in hand, her face set with determination. "Marcus, 3 hours ago I would have agreed with you about what's professionally appropriate, but 3 hours ago I was an ignorant woman who couldn't see past her own prejudices." "The gala starts in 40 minutes. Eleanor added, her earlier panic replaced by excitement. "Mother's right. You have to come. You have to play. Ladies, I understand your enthusiasm, but..." "No buts," Victoria interrupted. "I've spent years supporting that conservatory, donating money, serving on boards. Tonight, instead of showcasing mediocrity, I want to showcase true excellence." Marcus shook his head. "Eleanor should perform. This is her moment." Eleanor laughed, and for the first time in weeks it sounded genuinely happy. "Marcus, after hearing you play, I finally understand the difference between someone who plays music and someone who is music. I'm not ready for that stage, but you are." "I don't have appropriate clothing." "Michael's tuxedo," Victoria said suddenly. "You're about the same build. It's still in his closet." The mention of his deceased son brought a moment of heavy silence. Then Victoria's voice softened. "He would have loved your playing. He would have wanted his clothes to serve music again." 20 minutes later, Marcus stood in Michael's perfectly fitted tuxedo, staring at himself in the mirror. Eleanor appeared behind him, her eyes bright with tears. "You look like you belong on that stage," she said simply. The drive to Lincoln Center was surreal. Victoria sat beside Marcus in the back seat, a reversal that would have been unthinkable hours earlier, discussing the evening's program. "Professor Harrison will be shocked," she said, "but he'll have to acknowledge your credentials. I'm calling in every favor I have to get you on tonight's program." At the venue, Victoria's social influence proved formidable. Within minutes of their arrival, she had convinced the event organizers to add an exceptional guest performer to the lineup. Professor Harrison, a distinguished man in his 60s, approached with curiosity and slight irritation. "At Victoria, I understand you want to add someone to tonight's program?" "The schedule is quite full. Professor, I'd like you to meet Marcus Thompson, graduate of Juilliard, former student of Patricia Chen, composer of Variations on Hope." Harrison's expression shifted from annoyance to interest to genuine excitement. "Marcus Thompson? Good God, we've been trying to reach you for years. Your senior recital footage has become legendary among faculty." "You know my work?" Marcus asked, surprised. "Know it? We use your compositions in our advanced classes. Where have you been?" Before Marcus could answer the complicated question, Victoria stepped forward. "He's been taking care of his family, Professor, but tonight he's here to remind us what true artistry sounds like." The performance space at Lincoln Center buzzed with the elite of New York's cultural scene. Margaret Sterling sat in the front row, her expression smug as she anticipated Eleanor's failure. Other board members, donors, and society figures filled the elegant hall. When Professor Harrison introduced surprise guest performer Marcus Thompson, a ripple of recognition went through the more musically educated audience members. Marcus walked onto the stage, his heart pounding not with fear but with the familiar thrill of being where he belonged. He sat at the concert grand piano, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. The opening notes of his original composition, Resilience, filled the hall, and within moments the entire audience was transfixed. This wasn't just technical proficiency, this was music that spoke directly to the soul. The final notes of Marcus's performance lingered in the air. "I'm so sorry it took me this long to see who you really are." Professor Harrison appeared beside them, practically vibrating with excitement. "Marcus, we need to talk. The conservatory would be honored to have you join our faculty, and frankly, you should be performing regularly again." "Professor, I appreciate the offer, but my circumstances haven't changed. I still have family obligations." "Then we'll work around them," Victoria interrupted. "Whatever financial support you need, whatever arrangements, we consider it handled." Marcus stared at her. "Victoria, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. Not out of guilt, though God knows I have plenty of that. Out of recognition of what's right." She turned to Professor Harrison. "The conservatory needs teachers who understand that talent comes from everywhere, not just from privileged backgrounds." Eleanor appeared, having rushed backstage from her seat in the audience. "Marcus, I can't even find words. You made me understand what I've been missing." "What you've been missing," Marcus said gently, "is confidence in your own voice. You have musicality, Eleanor. You just need to trust it. Would you consider teaching me, really teaching me, not just technique, but how to connect with music the way you do?" Marcus looked at Victoria, who nodded eagerly. "I think that could be arranged." 3 months later, the Pemberton mansion had transformed. The music room was no longer a shrine to the past, but a vibrant center of learning. Marcus had moved from the garage apartment to a comfortable guest suite. His role evolved from driver to family friend and Eleanor's primary music instructor. Eleanor's improvement was remarkable, not just technically but emotionally. She was learning to play with the passion Marcus had recognized in her from the beginning. Victoria had become a different person entirely. Her social circle now included musicians from diverse backgrounds, and she had established a scholarship fund for talented students from underprivileged families. "I spent so many years measuring worth by all the wrong standards," she told Marcus one afternoon as they watched Eleanor practice. "Thank you for showing me what actually matters." Marcus smiled, his hands moving over his own composition at the piano. "We all have hidden depths, Victoria. Sometimes it just takes the right moment for them to surface." The story became legend. Dear friend, this story reminds us that talent, brilliance, and extraordinary gifts exist in every corner of our society, often hidden behind jobs, circumstances, or prejudices that prevent us from seeing people's true potential. Every day, we interact with individuals whose stories, skills, and dreams might surprise us if we took the time to look beyond surface appearances. The next time you meet someone new, remember Marcus and Victoria's journey. Everyone deserves respect, recognition, and the opportunity to be seen for who they truly are, not just what they do for work. If this story moved you and opened your heart to seeing people differently, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Together we can build a world where everyone's hidden talents have the chance to shine.